Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Global Missions Podcast. I'm Maggie, and we are so glad to have you with us today. Whether you've been listening for years or you've just found us recently, we love hearing from you, and we wanted to ask you to consider leaving us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. If your platform doesn't support it, you can actually do it online as well with Apple Podcasts. Today, we are honored to have Michèle Phoenix join us to discuss her latest book, Pieces of Purple. Drawing from her own experience as a missionary's kid and decades of work with third culture kids, Michèle offers profound insights into the complexities and the beauties of growing up between cultures. Whether you're a TCK yourself, you know someone who is, or you're simply curious about the best ways to love the kids of missionaries you support, this episode is for you. We've titled it, Loving the Pieces of Purple in Our Midst.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Global Missions Podcast. Our guest today is Michèle Phoenix, who joins me not only in audio, but in video, so I can wave. Hi, Michèle.
Hi, happy to be with you.
Oh, yeah, we are looking forward to this conversation, and I just mentioned that because it's newer that we add the video, especially in YouTube. Michèle was raised in France by a Canadian father and an American mother. She is a mentor, a writer, and a speaker with a heart for missionaries' kids. We're going to come very specifically to that term in just a moment. Michèle has been a teacher at Black Forest Academy, which is located in Germany. It's a wonderful MK school there. Kathleen and I, my wife, had the chance to visit Kandern, Germany for the very first time last fall, Michèle. And we were there for the international chapel service, where all the kids who are from such a range of nations around the world, dozens of nations represented in the world. What a blessing to be there on that particular occasion. It was amazing. You've done it. You've been there many times, I'm sure, for that.
You timed it well, yes.
Yeah, it was very special. Michèle now travels globally to consult and teach on topics related to this unique people group, and she loves good conversations, French pastries, mischievous students, and paths to healing. Michèle, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Well, just so that our listeners can be introduced a bit to you, would you tell us a bit about your story? Give us a context and how you came to have such a deep connection to TCK ministry.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief because we have a lot to get to today. As you mentioned, I grew up in France. My dad was Canadian. My mom is American, born and raised in France, went through the French school system until grade 9, and experienced some challenges even in those early years, even before grade 9. And then in grade 9, I started attending Black Forest Academy in Germany. My parents moved out a year later and taught there as well, so I could live at home. I'm not built for dorm life or for residential life, and I'm so thrilled that was an option for me to live at home. At BFA, at Black Forest Academy, I quickly discovered that everything that I thought about myself was weird was actually quite common among these other students who had been shaped by different things than I had been shaped by, their cultures, their family life, their experiences. But we had all of these commonalities that I thought were kind of unsurvivable quirks when I was younger. And I realized that this was my tribe. These are my people. And even though we come from different places and have maybe different perspectives on life as well, that we have more in common than what separates us. So that kind of whetted my appetite for what this weird population is that in those days were called MKs. And now we've brought in the definition to third culture kids, which includes Army kids and business kids and diplomatic kids. So I left there, went to Wheaton College, horrible time in college because of what I brought to the experience, which is actually one of the main motivating factors for what I do today, because I'm trying to give today's MKs the information and insight that I didn't receive at their age. And then after a year of working stateside, I returned to Black Forest Academy to work in the communications department. But as is so often the case in international schools, they needed teachers, and I was fully qualified by having a pulse. So I ended up in the classroom and taught there for 20 years and never set foot in the communications department, which is fine by me. I love teaching. And yes. And then in 2000, 8, God moved me back stateside or to this continent, using cancer to do so. He did not want me to have cancer, did not inflict the cancer on me, but having cancer made me think in terms of, if I have 1 or 2 years left, what footprint do I want to leave behind? And with his help and with much rebellion, I eventually concluded that I wanted to leave a larger footprint and do more with what I'd accumulated as far as understanding and research into this MK population. And that was 15 years ago. And I am still at it today, teaching and traveling and writing and podcasting and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, we have been blessed, and thank you for sharing a bit of that story. There's some pieces that I didn't know yet, and I have appreciated some of the writing that Michèle has done. We will mention her book. It's entitled Pieces of Purple. So we'll come to that in a moment, Michèle. But I don't want to assume that our listeners are all familiar with some of the terminology we're using. You helped a moment ago. MK, missionary kid or missionary kids, and TCK, third culture kids. So those that are in between two other cultures, but there's a middle space. You use language, and it's right in the title of your book, about purple. And so would you take a moment and explain why purple is so important in your thinking, and how are you using that analogy?
Yeah, one of the key elements of the definition of third culture kid is it's children who have spent a significant number of their formative years in a culture other than their passport culture. And it's important for parents who have not done so, and for church members and friends of MKs who have not grown up that way, to understand that we process and absorb our cultures differently than a person who might have spent all of their formative years in one place and be really bonded to that place and that experience of life. So the contrast is in the illustration that was created by Sandy Smith in Colorado Springs at MTI, is that people who have grown up in one culture and then add another are like beads. They might have grown up on planet red, so they have red beads in them. They might have added planet blue later in life, so they had blue beads. But if you mix them all up, there's still a distinction between the beads. They can still separate them into two stacks. They can still identify which bead belongs on which planet. MKs who grow up between two planets are just absorbent. They're more like Play-Doh. So you mix the two balls of Play-Doh together, and the red and blue, and you come up with this beautiful shade of Play-Doh, which is also complicated and complex and difficult to manage and understand sometimes. But there's much less clarity in the way TCKs and MKs experience growing up cross-culturally. And parents who expect them to have that clarity, and teachers and welcoming churches and friends of the family, are going to notice some things that seem out of place or kind of uncomfortable to them. And it's just a product of having been hyper-absorbent purple Play-Doh for all of their years without the clarity that might have allowed them to put it through a grid and assess what it was that they were incorporating into their view of self and God and the world.
Michèle, in your writing, you very helpfully use the imagery of the color purple here. Would you just take a minute and explain why that is and why that's such a rich piece in your writing?
I think it's really useful to understand this concept for parents of MKs, for people who are in relationship with MKs, for pastors and missions committees. And it has to do with an illustration that was created by Sandy Smith at MTI in Colorado Springs. And the way she describes it is anybody who, while the definition of TCK says that it's anybody who spent a significant number of their formative years in a culture other than their passport culture. And the formative years is key here. So missionaries who go overseas, who have grown up in one culture and are really grounded in that culture and that view of life, will add another culture to the mix as if they were beads. So they grew up on planet red, and they have a bunch of red beads in a jar. Imagine that. And then they add blue beads to the jar, which might represent planet blue, the planet they went to. And you can shake up that jar as much as you want to. And these adults who, again, were grounded in one culture originally will be able to distinguish what belongs where. They can make stacks of red beads and blue beads and kind of figure out what is appropriate in each location. MKs who grow up between cultures during their formative years, which are very kind of absorbent, life-forming years, they're more like red and blue balls of Play-Doh that get mushed together. And as you mush them together, they become purple. And this is why the book is called Pondering Purple, because there is such richness and complexity in MKs. And what's really key to understand regarding this illustration is that MKs will not have the clarity their parents have. They won't know, oh, this belongs here and this belongs here. They might have a more muddled sense of their cultural belonging that they will spend a lifetime trying to figure out with the help of people who might have the red bead, blue bead, or who might be purple like them and therefore have more of a connection with what that life experience is. That is part of why I do what I do.
That is very helpful imagery, I think, and we can get our minds around that, the two colors and the mix in the middle. Of course, many churches and many senders, as we often call them in this program, those who want to care for missionary families, we want to do a good job of caring for our MKs. Some may be back in North America permanently. They're transitioning into college or studies or work and coming into adulthood. Some may be home on furlough. What are some ways that churches can do a good job of caring for our MKs?
This is where speaking at the rate of a French person is going to come in handy because there's so many things that I could say. I'm going to try to say them succinctly but quickly. Number one, to acknowledge that TCKs are going to be processing that transition differently. Some of them are going to relish it and some of them are going to resist it. So not to assume in either direction that they're wanting to be there or not wanting to be there. I would say an important thing is to offer TCKs a safe zone. And by safe zone, I mean relationships that are safe to them. This is going to be difficult to establish during the transition. So if churches can put something into place that allows people to connect with their MKs before the transition, while they're still on the field, to be kind of a regular voice or presence in their lives that'll allow them to view you more quickly as a safe person. I encourage churches and members of churches to be curious about the former life or the former planet or Play-Doh of the MKs that they're welcoming home, not just to ask broad questions like, oh, what did you like about it? And what do you like about being back home is a difficult word for some MKs, being back in your passport culture, which is home. For so many of them, it's not. But ask to see pictures, ask for their favorite memories, ask what their best adventures have been. Seek to know the whole person, not just the MK piece, or if you're a youth group leader or a pastor or somebody else who has a specific role in their life, look beyond that role. They're more than a youth group student. They're more than a member of your church. Try to know more about what it is that makes them tick, what is hidden inside their purple. And then you might also see some differences in them in behavior, in language, in worldview that might strike you as odd or even disconcerting. I encourage you to consider that in their purpleness, in their purple Play-Doh-ness, they have absorbed so much information and so many values, even moral values, that they didn't put through a grid of is this right or wrong because they were purple. They didn't have the clarity of the red and blue beads. So before judging or censoring an MK that's in your midst, I would encourage you to ask questions like, oh, I noticed you said that. Is that a common way to say things where you come from? Or I noticed that you're taking this very casually. I wonder what's behind that. I had a student, actually, I grew up in French schools where cheating was common and not considered to be morally wrong, and teachers actually respected the best cheaters in the class. And I wouldn't have known when I moved to Black Forest Academy and cheated on my first exam to establish my kind of social, I know. Nobody told me. And then I quickly realized that this was not a universal value. So some MKs in that purple will be carrying things that have not been assessed, that their parents don't even know are in there. So it's really important to ask questions before judging, and then helping them to add to their identity in the place they now are, giving them opportunities to shine, giving them opportunities to ask their own questions and to discover aspects of this culture that they might not know yet. They might have some practical needs if they're moving into a residence in a university. They might not have the sheets and towels and everything else that they need. They might not know how to drive yet. Could use some help with that, with how to navigate, insurance and medical stuff and all these things. Ordering at Subway, which can be a traumatic experience when you've got 15 people behind you and you have to make all those decisions so fast. And then finally, if you can help them to, if they're of the age where they would be accepted to attend retreats, re-entry retreats. Interaction does great ones in the States. Reboot is a fabulous one in Canada that I participate in every year. they will not want to go. But if you can help them to finance it and encourage them to go, I think it makes a huge difference in that transition into university or the workplace.
Wow, you packed a lot into that little segment there, and so rich. Let me go in reverse order a little bit and just give a word about the retreats for these TCKs, MKs. If we can make that possible somehow, and here I'm speaking to agency leaders, I'm speaking to church leaders, I'm speaking to sponsors or donors, please, if you can help facilitate that. And it's just proven so rich. And we hear back afterwards, even from the reluctant attendees, I don't want to go to that, whatever. When they get together with their tribe, it doesn't matter as much where they've come from in the world. We see MKs coming from Asia and Africa and Europe and around the world. And when they come together, even though they're from different geographies, they, as in their purpleness, if I can respectfully use that, I'm not purple myself, they are blessed, and we hear that from them. So please consider this, and if at all possible, make it happen. You also mentioned youth pastors along the way, and I made a note in my margin here, youth pastors. Thank you to those who are setting the space for those in their preteen and teen years, maybe college years, that if we can help equip you, if we can help encourage you and get ready to be sensitive to some of these things, thank you for your sensitivity to care for these special ones who come in, and for being curious and receptive to differentness. I forget the word you used exactly, Michèle, but these kids are going to be a little different. And thank you for your willingness to be gracious there. Last thing, quick shout out to Moody Bible Institute, where one of our sons studied there. They actually, I just wanted to mention this as an illustration, they actually have a week in advance for international students coming onto campus. Before all the American students arrive, who are the vast majority, and they know what it's like to live in Chicago, they have a whole week set aside for international students to arrive, to equip them, to familiarize, what does it look like to live in Chicago, downtown Chicago? Where can you go? Where can you not? It's not wise to go alone, all that. And they did such a good job, I felt, of blessing these kids. What is the analogy for your church? When you have a family coming on home service, how do we provide some of those same safe spaces? Michèle, just so good. Now, we are using this expression, MK. You make a tweak that might not be evident when we just talk about it quickly to the term MK, missionary kid. And I can see it in the text. Michèle, you write it missionary's kid. It's a child of a missionary family. Why is that simple little grammatical adjustment so important?
It's the only term I use. I don't use missionary kid. And the reason that I prefer it is that it makes them the children of missionaries. It doesn't put the pressure on them to view themselves as missionaries too. They might want to participate, but we don't want them to feel obligated to participate. And it removes some of the pressure to perform or be spiritually mature beyond their years that so many MKs experience. So they are the children of missionaries. And what they do with that, it gives them some agency as opposed to a label that they have to live up to.
Well, before we take a break, I just want to ask you about some practical ideas here. You've got a list of some things. I've had a chance to read some of your book, of course, but what are some of the maybe smaller things? They might seem somewhat insignificant to us, but what are the things that we in caring churches can do to have a positive impact?
I will just mention 3. There are so many, and you can kind of derive what you need from those. The first is before the MK returns, especially if these are younger MKs, connect with the parents and ask them more information about this MK. What do they enjoy? What do we need to avoid asking them to do? What are the kind of the staples of their existence where they live now? And what do you foresee might be some difficulties adjusting back to whatever culture it is? And then find ways of including them in social gatherings, or I've mentioned youth groups before, camps, whatever, without platforming them. So that actually is kind of where the missionaries kid and missionary kid comes in. Don't treat them like missionaries, but find ways of including them in social networks without making them perform, making them, say John 3:16 in 3 languages every time you gather, and without expecting them to know more or be more than their peers. And then finally, in words and actions, make sure that they know that you don't expect perfection from them, which is going to lead into another topic I think we'll address a little bit later. We have so many higher expectations for MKs than we would have for the average church-going teenager that lives among us and doesn't come in with all the purple the MKs do.
Well, you, our listeners, will not want to miss the next part of our conversation with Michèle. We're going to take a short break, and we want to share with you a resource that we hope will be helpful to you and your church.
If today's episode is of special interest to you, we have some other episodes that you may also find really useful. Way back at the beginning of the Global Missions podcast, we hosted an episode with Paul Dyke, who's the former Canadian MK Network leader. There are few people who love MKs as much as Paul does, and it's a fantastic episode titled, How Can We Support Missionary Kids? We'd love for you to consider giving it a listen if you'd like to keep learning more about this topic. We also have episode number 218, which is Caring for Third Culture Kids with Lauren Wells, founder of TCK Training. Again, so much good information and so much that's relevant to today's episode. If this is on your heart and you're wanting to keep learning, then tune in to episode number 11 and number 218, which you can find on our website, globalmissionstoolbox.com/podcasts. Now, back to Michèle and Mags.
Well, we are back with Michèle Phoenix, who, as an author, has helped us with this book entitled Pieces of Purple to help serve alongside TCKs with care and with excellence. You've got many stories and insights, Michèle, in your book. I just am grateful for how accessible it is. And for our listeners, you need to know this is a book that you can pick up and read, and you will laugh. You may cry. I did. Michèle knows this, that for the first time I remember, I brought a box of Kleenex to this interview because we want to take good care of our kids. We want to bless our families. And these precious younger ones are so very important in God's plans. And He has plans for them too. How do we care well for them? With those stories and insights, Michèle, there's one section that I'd like to come back to. You've entitled it The Tyranny of Shoulds. So should, right? Shoulds, for those that are just listening, SHOULDS. Okay, the tyranny of shoulds. Could you explain what these shoulds are and where did they come from?
Yeah. I discovered the power of the shoulds just a couple years ago when I was just starting to think through the impact of shoulds. And I was at a camp in Georgia for adult TCKs and brought up this topic and called them shoulds because there really hadn't been a term for it, I think, before that. And these adult TCKs within 2 minutes had articulated all of the ridiculous expectations, the unachievable expectations that they felt were heaped upon them. Whether they were or not is a different conversation. But they felt that by virtue of being TCKs, they should be mature, happy, not admit to struggling, be able to fit in, be fluent in other languages, pretend everything is okay, be okay with every move their families made, be spiritual superstars on the playground at age 7, be interesting, make friends, never bother anybody. I mean, the list, we filled 2 whiteboards in about 5 minutes straight with everything these adult TCKs were still feeling. So the shoulds are these unachievable expectations that might not have been verbalized to them. They just sense that the supporting churches, the mission world, their parents, all of the eyes watching them all the time are expecting something extraordinary from them. And I think it's important to note that there's a difference between instruction and a should. Instruction has to happen in families, in the church. And it assumes that there's going to be a discipleship and apprenticeship, that you might fail, we're moving in this direction, we'll help you to get there. And there's a growth pattern to that kind of instruction. The should say either you achieve this at age 7 or you bring shame on yourself, on your family, on their ministry, and on God. So too many MKs live with a deep sense of failure because every day, even at age 18, 19, or 29, they're trying to live up to expectations that no human being can, and certainly no human being who has grown up in some of the complicated contexts that MKs do.
So if I can summarize, unhealthy, unrealistic expectations that may or may not be actual, but are felt by our MKs. And as you noted, these were adults. It's held for a long time. There is a long-term impact here, probably established in earlier years and carried forward for potentially a long time.
And one extra piece that's important here is that they feel not just like failures to their parents or to the onlookers, to God himself. They feel that these expectations are heaped on their shoulders by God himself. And one minor failure feels like God is disappointed and disconnected now because they didn't manage to live up to what they thought was the expectation.
So how can we, as senders who love and care for these kids, how can we be helpful?
So much of this is unspoken that I think the antidote has to be spoken many times, repeatedly, forcefully, allowing them to be kids, acknowledging that they are kids or that they have lived differently and that there are going to be consequences to that or that it's going to show up in different ways. So permission to be kids, to fail, to grieve, to disagree, to doubt, to redefine significance. One of the shoulds is that I must be a missionary because I was raised as an MK. Redefine what a significant life is. Then to offer grace, often and overtly, to say, I understand, we all understand that wasn't something that we value. However, let's try again. The apprenticeship, right? The discipleship. Show curiosity. Again, as I said previously, maybe what you're seeing is actually a product of having absorbed a lot into their purple. And finally, point them to the real Jesus, not the Jesus who stands by with his list of shoulds and checks off however many they fail to live up to on any day, but to point them to the Jesus who sat with and spent time with people whose lives were far more problematic than theirs are sometimes. And he loved them and he didn't reject them. And he gave them gentle instructions, not to make him look good, but to increase the goodness in their own lives and to flourish and to know him in relationship as opposed to know him as a list of unattainable shoulds.
Just observing that there's investment of time and care here. You mentioned relationship. You mentioned some efforts that might be before a family arrives home on furlough or home assignment or whatever the agency or your church might call it. Is there anything previous to that? That's going to be an investment of time and energy. And then especially in person, that relational fabric that will give credibility to the words that we have that I agree need to be spoken. You mentioned discussions about faith, Michèle. I think this is a particular, a special point. These are coming from faith-filled families, these precious MKs, and they are on their own journey. I just wonder about that intersection of expectations and faith and pressure and being spiritual. Just speak into that a little for us.
Well, I think the conversations will depend on who the MK is and how they've navigated their own faith. So, of course, there are MKs who are on fire for God. There are MKs who have deep, foundational relationships with Jesus. And there are some, for whatever multitude of reasons, have either loosened their grip on their faith or kind of released their faith. So it's important to really have conversations that allow for both possibilities, both ends of that spectrum and everything in between. It's really important not to make an MK a model of faith for others or to assume that by virtue of being MKs, there's kind of an insta-faith that happens in them. They will go through the same challenges, the same questioning that any child in a North American context will as well. It's also important to know that because the MK has grown up in a religious, that's not the word I want, in a Christian environment, it's also the family business, which sounds cynical, but it is what mom and dad do. So bridging the gap between ministry obligations and an actual thriving, flourishing relationship with Jesus might be something to consider that's difficult for them. Also, they've seen behind the curtain of ministry, which is not always pretty. So I think emphasizing that faith is a long individual journey and that they can take the pace they need. They can discover Jesus. I did. I came back to college and I still didn't know who Jesus was or have a relationship with him until I was 23, actually. So giving them the runway they need and the supportive, loving, understanding context they need to figure out for themselves what that relationship, that personal relationship, is going to look like. This is why I focus on MKs and not the broader TCK world, because of those eternal outcomes. And I've seen too many MKs, and I was on the border of that myself. I've seen too many MKs reject the faith because of things that had nothing to do with who Jesus is and what relationship with him can bring to their lives.
Wow, this just helps make sense of it all. If we set them up as a model and they feel like they've got to be a model, then you put the weight of expectation on them and it may not fit at all.
And because we don't want to fail, we're not even going to attempt to be that model sometimes. We're just going to walk away because failing feels like shame. So we're not even going to try anymore.
Well, I want to go to one more door, so to speak, in this rich topic here. You've mentioned that there are deeper emotions when you have a relationship with someone, then those can begin to come out. And if we end up opening those doors, Lord willing, with these precious MKs, there will be emotions, deep emotions expressed. You do talk a bit about grief. Would you take just a few minutes to talk about what are some of the signs of grief? What might our listeners be looking for, watching for, and then just a word on how we can be helpful in responding to that?
Yeah, it's a huge topic. Grief is ubiquitous in the world of MKs. In great part because of the revolving door of ministry. Even the MKs who, like me, stayed put for 13 years of my childhood, people around me were constantly coming and going, and we attach quickly. That's one of our traits. And then the letting go is that much more intense. Adding to that is the shoulds that actually are processed as grief for MKs because it's that failure and that shame of over and over not being able to live up to the shoulds. And because life happens to people on the mission field like it happens to people, in North America, there might be trauma in their lives. Trauma that happened in some cases because their parents were called to that place. So all of this gets wrapped into a sense of grief that we see in TCKs all the time. In our reentry retreats in the summer, we have a whole day to process grief. I think what's important for people to know is that grief doesn't always just look like sadness. We expect tears. We expect somebody to look down because sadness kind of falls under the category of one of the shoulds. You shouldn't be sad because you've got God, so you should be fine. So it might find different ways of showing up, like isolation, rebellion, physical illness, hyperactivity, looking way too happy all the time, addiction. Any kind of failure to thrive might be a sign that there's some grief there that needs to be addressed. And it needs to be unpacked very gently because they might not even know that that's what's motivating some of what we're seeing. They might not even know that it's grief because it's so common on the mission field. They think everybody feels this amount of loss in their lives. So conversations, relationship, and then maybe helping them to move towards the kind of help that could be of good assistance to them as they're dealing with it.
That's really good. There is more to learn from this book Michèle has written, Pieces of Purple, The Greatness, Grit, and Grace of Growing Up MK. And I want to recommend it to you. If our listeners want to learn more from you, Michèle, there, of course, is the book, but are there other ways that they can learn from your experience?
Yeah. My website is michellephoenix.com, Michèle with one L, Phoenix.com. I presume it will be linked somewhere in the notes. And from that website, you can find all of my MK articles that I've written. My blog is there with all the new articles that appear there. Pondering Purple is my podcast. It is just the audio version of my articles and hopefully soon the audio version of the book as well. And you can contact me through the website as well. The website also has a link to Flecks of Gold, which is a book that is not available anywhere online that has to do with my rumination on suffering and faith and finding God despite the humanness of life on earth.
Okay. We will make sure that all of those references are included in our show notes and a few other things that we've talked about along this way as well. So you can check that out at the website, globalmissionstoolbox.com. And up in the upper right, you can click on podcast and then find the show notes. Michèle, this has been very rich, and our listeners know I often close with a particular question here. If you could imagine, as you often do, you don't need to imagine it, you do it, standing with a group of people who are the senders. They're in the home churches, the sending churches, missions committee people, people who pray, people who give, the pastors. And you have an opportunity to address them on this topic. What would you like to say to that group?
Really broad and good question. I would say that relationship is the entryway to any kind of connection with TCKs, and that relationship with people who are not TCKs are going to take time to form and for trust to build. So don't be in a hurry. Don't make them a project. Don't swoop in and say, I'm going to heal you from your purpleness, because purpleness is not something to be healed from. It is beautiful and precious, and I'm so grateful that I'm an MK. But make relationship a priority, and from that can come a lot of really good things.
That's beautiful. Purple is beautiful. Well, this is going to bear fruit. Michèle, we have some MKs coming home to our home church here in Ontario in just a few weeks. And so this will be something that I and our missions committee will benefit from. Thank you so much for your ongoing ministry, and today for being part of the Global Missions Podcast.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for asking really good questions.
Thanks again for joining us today. We hope that today's episode blessed you as much as Michèle's book, Pieces of Purple, blessed us. There are links to purchase her book and also to access resources that were mentioned throughout this episode in the show notes, which you can access at globalmissionstoolbox.com/podcasts. We hope that you'll reach out to us on YouTube, on Instagram, and that you'll consider leaving us a review today. Your reviews help other believers find us, surely, but they also put the message of the gospel and God's love for the nations into the path of people who may not otherwise have heard. We hope that you'll take that time, and we're so grateful. But if you'd like to connect with us more personally, you are always welcome to email us at info@globalmissionstoolbox.com. Join us again in 2 weeks, and we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.